The rain fell so hard it felt like the sky had a hole in it. I crouched in the shadows of the roof ridge, watching the water stream off the edge of my bamboo hat in a solid curtain. My straw raincoat was soaked through, clinging to me like a cold, slimy second skin. In my left eye, the world was bathed in a faint, eerie red glow. That was the Chi Lin demon core inside me, passively sensing the presence of evil. It was the middle of the night in Chengnan, at the 7th house of Laohui Alley. The red light flickered weakly inside the courtyard walls before dying out. I moved. I didn't jump down. Instead, I crawled along the ridge on all fours like a literal gecko. This was one of the gifts the demon core gave me. Tiny suction pads on my fingertips turned the slick, wet tiles into stable ground. I stopped in a crooked willow tree outside the wall and peered through the leaves. The yard was pitch black, but I could see everything. In my crimson vision, a small, hunched shadow was pressed against the window of the east wing. Its claws scratched at the paper window, making a tiny, sickening rasp. It was a sure Meng, a low-level dream eater. It wasn't much of a threat, usually just stealing children's dreams and leaving them sickly for a few days. Normally, the lowest-ranked officers of the Demon Suppression Bureau wouldn't even bother with it. But I wasn't an officer. I was just a night watchman with no rank at all. My job was to handle the scraps that the experts looked down on and the government ignored. I wasn't supposed to use the demon core's power. Every time I tapped into it, the core, forced into my dantian, burned like a red-hot iron against my soul. It eroded what little humanity I had left. But I had no choice. Without its power, I couldn't even see the weakest demon, let alone kill it. I held my breath and reached for the weapon on my back. I unwrapped the thick cloth to reveal a rusty, jagged piece of iron about 2 feet long. It looked like a broken fragment of a much larger blade. It was the only thing my father left me. It wasn't magical, it was just sharper and harder than normal steel. I needed a killing blow. These dream eaters were skittish. At the slightest hint of danger, they would vanish into smoke. I lowered my body, feeling the icy rain slide down my neck. I focused my mind, cautiously touching the searing heat in my gut. Pain exploded instantly. It shot from my belly to my skull like 1,000 glowing needles stabbing my veins. I gritted my teeth until I tasted blood. The red light in my left eye flared. The world became terrifyingly clear. I could see the fine fur on the demon's back and the ripples of sound beginning to form in its throat to lull the child inside to sleep. Now, I leaped from the tree, my broken blade leading the way. I was an arrow cutting through the rain. My raincoat flared out behind me, trailing a veil of water. The demon sensed me and whipped its head around, panic flashing in its beady green eyes. It opened its mouth to spit out thick smoke, but I was faster. The broken blade flashed in the rain, piercing the exact weak spot where its neck met its shoulder, the location of its core. Squelch! A short, sharp shriek was swallowed by the storm. The demon's body convulsed and dissolved into a cloud of foul black mist, leaving nothing behind but a small tuft of grayish-white fur on the wet ground. I dropped to one knee, leaning on my blade and gasping for air. Cold sweat matted my forehead, mixing with the rain. The burning in my gut didn't stop when the power faded. Instead, it felt like a poked viper, biting at my internal organs. My vision blurred and my ears rang. Half-demon. The word haunted me. I was neither human nor monster, despised by the righteous and hated by the demons. The Bureau only kept me around because they needed a stray dog to do their dirty work, a dog they could throw away at any time. I forced myself to stand, shivering. I picked up the tuft of fur, wrapped it in oil paper, and tucked it into my shirt. This was my proof. It was worth 20 copper coins and maybe 2 stale buns. As I struggled to get up, a tiny trace of light caught the edge of my red vision. It was at the spot where the demon had vanished. It wasn't demon energy. It was a faint, pure spark of purple lightning that disappeared in an instant. My heart hammered. I knew that aura. I had only felt it from a distance a few times, but it was unmistakable. It was the remnant of a cultivator's lightning spell, and a high-level one at that. It was so faint that I only saw it because I had pushed my demon core to the limit. It had been hidden perfectly inside the demon's energy. The Dream Eater hadn't come here by accident. Someone had lured it here. But who? And why? A cold dread crawled up my spine. This wasn't a simple hunt anymore. My hand tightened on the hilt of my broken blade. The grip was slick with rain, but for a split second, I felt the rusty, uneven texture of the hilt move under my fingers. I froze and looked down. The blade was still just a piece of junk, rusty and dead. I figured it was just a hallucination brought on by the demon core's backlash. The rain got heavier. I shook my head, pushing the doubt aside. I needed to get back and survive the night. I wrapped my blade, climbed over the wall, and vanished into the misty streets. The Demon Suppression Bureau office in Yunzhou was located in the most decaying corner of the West City. The gold paint on the sign had mostly peeled off, making it look like a tomb in the dark. I slipped in through the side door and walked down the damp, dim corridor to the records room. The old scribe on duty didn't even look up. I reported the kill in Laohui Alley. He crossed a line off his ledger and tossed 20 copper coins onto the table with a clatter. "Go on then," he rasped, sounding exhausted. I grabbed the coins and turned to leave. "Wait," the old man called out. He looked at me with cloudy eyes. "You look terrible. The core acting up again." I just nodded. He sighed and pushed a small paper packet across the desk. "The last of the Qingxin powder in the warehouse. It's almost expired. Take it. Use it sparingly. I don't know if we'll get more next month." Qingxin powder was basic medicine to soothe restless demon energy. For me, it was a lifeline. I took it and whispered, "Thanks, Uncle Qin." "Don't thank me," he muttered, lowering his voice. "Things are getting messy lately. Watch yourself. Don't go wandering at night." My mind flashed back to that purple lightning. I hesitated, then leaned in. "Uncle Qin, have there been any cultivators active in the city lately? Or any strange cases?" His eyes flickered. He glanced around the empty, dripping corridor and leaned closer. "Don't ask questions you shouldn't. Just do your job. Have you heard about what happened at Liu Family Village?" I vaguely remembered Liu Family Village. It was about 10 miles east of the city, home to a prestigious family of local gentry. Word was their ancestors had even served as minor officials. I told old Kai I hadn't heard much about them lately. "You haven't heard? Good," he rasped. A sound caught in his throat, half sneer, half sigh. 7 days ago, all 43 members of the household were gone. Overnight. It was a bloodbath. The local magistrate's men had checked it out and blamed it on a demon attack. They hunted for a culprit, but as soon as the files were submitted, the case was buried. Someone from above stepped in, sealed the records, and forbid anyone from mentioning it again. My heart skipped a beat. "Above? You mean the prefect?" Old Kai looked at me like I was an idiot. He pointed a finger toward the ceiling and stayed silent. "The immortal sects," I whispered. My mouth went dry. Anything involving the cultivators was a forbidden topic. Places like the Demon Suppression Bureau didn't even have the right to touch those cases. "Why are you telling me this?" Old Kai lowered his head and started clicking his abacus again. "Because you're on duty tonight. Tomorrow night, you might have to do a sweep near Liu Family Village. No one dares go near the place now. We need someone who isn't afraid of death to take a look. The bureau staff are staying clear. You're a demon host. You're supposed to be braver." I stayed silent. This was a command, but it felt like a trap. If I went, I might see something I wasn't supposed to. If I didn't, it was insubordination. "I understand," I said. I tucked the Qingxin powder away and turned to leave. I walked back to my quarters, a damp, dark room with nothing but a wooden bed and a battered chest. Once the door was shut, I finally let go of my clenched fists. My palms were slick with cold sweat. The 20 copper coins felt hot in my hand. I stashed them in a clay jar under the bed. It felt light. I was still nowhere near enough to buy a soul-stabilizing pill to fix my fractured spirit. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the paper packet. 3 dusty gray pills sat inside. I swallowed one dry. A faint coolness slid down my throat, barely suppressing the burning ache in my core. Outside, the rain began to taper off. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. My left eye kept flashing with that strange purple residue from the cat demon's death. The old man's words echoed in my head. Liu Family Village. 43 people. Gone. The cat demon's strange power, the massacre, and the immortal sects covering it all up. The pieces were swirling in my mind, but they didn't fit together yet. They just felt dangerous. I rolled over and my hand brushed against the wrapped bundle leaning against the bed. It was my broken blade. The cloth was cold and damp. Acting on a sudden impulse, I sat up and unwrapped it. In the dim light, the rusted, jagged metal looked normal. I ran my finger along the blade, feeling the cold, rough surface. When my fingertips slid over a deep pit of rust near the hilt, the blade hummed. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible vibration. My pupils shrunk. At the exact same moment, the demon core in my body, which hadn't fully settled, gave a violent leap. It was as if it were being pulled by a magnet. The burning sensation intensified instantly. The vibration lasted only a second before the blade went dead again. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the weapon. This broken piece of junk my father left me had never been anything but heavy and sharp. Now, it was reacting to the demon energy inside me. The night grew deep. The rain stopped, leaving only the rhythmic drip of water from the eaves. A distant, shrill owl cry pierced the silence from the east. The sun hadn't fully risen when a gray light squeezed through the cracks in my window. I was sitting cross-legged on the bed, trying to guide my weak internal breath to soothe the injuries from using the demon core last night. The cooling effect of the medicine was gone. The foreign object in my gut felt like a piece of red-hot charcoal embedded in my flesh, radiating pain and a strange, restless hunger. It wanted the broken blade. That connection last night wasn't a hallucination. Had the demon core awakened the blade, or was the blade waiting for the core? I pushed the thoughts aside. The priority was Lu family village. Old Kai's hint and the purple lightning on the cat demon were two pieces of a puzzle that made me skin crawl. The Bureau wasn't sending me to investigate. They were using me as a canary in a coal mine. Or worse, bait. I checked my gear. A few crookedly drawn talismans of questionable quality. A small bag of barrier-breaking powder. A mix of cinnabar and filth I'd bought for 3 coppers at a flea market. It was standard issue for a night watcher, mostly used to annoy low-level spirits. A bundle of oil-soaked fire sticks. And finally, the broken blade, carefully rewrapped. It felt heavy and cold, showing no sign of the resonance from the night before. I changed into a fresh set of dark clothes, leaving my wet ones in the corner. I didn't wear any badges or markers of the Demon Suppression Bureau. Sometimes, being invisible is the best armor. As I stepped out, the door to the neighboring room creaked open. Zhao Wu, a tall, sallow-faced man, walked out rubbing his eyes. He saw me and forced a lazy smile. "Morning, Brother Lin. Early shift. Heading east to check things out," I mumbled. Zhao Wu leaned in, lowering his voice. "East, toward Lu family village." A flicker of something, fear or excitement, crossed his eyes. "Be careful, man. I heard that place is cursed. Even the cultivators who went to seal the case almost got caught in something nasty. People like us." He shook his head and patted my shoulder. "Good luck." I nodded and walked through the narrow courtyard, leaving through the back gate. The village was 10 miles away, a 2-hour walk. I kept a steady pace but stayed alert. The closer I got, the emptier the road became. For the last 2 miles, there wasn't a soul in sight. The fields were overgrown and abandoned. The air carried a faint, sickly scent, not rot, but a mix of burnt earth and metallic sweetness. My left eye twitched. Even without drawing on my core, I could see faint, dark red wisps at the edge of my vision. Lingering resentment. The village appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a peaceful hamlet. It was a silent, gray cluster of buildings swallowed by mist. The outer fences were smashed and charred. Dead trees stood like skeletal fingers pointing at the sky. Under a leaning archway at the entrance, 2 men stood guard. They wore teal uniforms with straight sabers at their waists. They looked sharp, professional. They weren't from the Bureau or the local guard. I recognized the cloud patterns on their chests, the elite scouts of the Yunzhou prefecture. They reported directly to the prefect and often worked for the immortal sects. They had set up a perimeter. I stopped and watched from a distance. If the scouts were here, it meant the village was under strict lockdown. It might even still be under the cultivator's watch. Old Kai had sent me into a hornet's nest. Walking straight through the front entrance was out of the question. I circled around to the side of the village, staying low. I found a dried-up drainage ditch and used the overgrown weeds and dirt embankments for cover. I crept toward a section of the perimeter wall that had crumbled into a jagged gap. The moment I vaulted over the wall, that strange scent hit me like a physical blow. It was suffocating. I held my breath, pressing my back against the shadows of the wall, and listened. The only sound was the wind whistling through broken doors and windows. It was a dead, heavy silence. I stood up, and my stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. I was in a common farmer's courtyard. The front door was splintered into toothpicks, and the windows were nothing but black, empty sockets. Broken clay pots and overturned tools lay scattered everywhere. But it was the stains that stopped my heart. Large, dark brown patches covered the ground and the walls, dried and blackened. In the gray morning light, it was a horrific sight. These weren't just spots of blood. It had been sprayed, splashed, and dragged in long, jagged streaks. It covered almost every surface in my line of sight. There were no bodies. They had already been cleared out, but the sheer volume and pattern of the blood told the story. This wasn't just a killing, it was a frenzy. It looked like something had literally torn these people apart with a primal, savage rage. I forced myself to look away, and I needed to focus. I didn't dare activate the monster core in my gut yet. Instead, I relied on my heightened senses, a side effect of the transplant. The air felt stagnant, thick with the weight of death and resentment. But beneath that, I felt something else. A faint, tingling sensation that made my skin crawl. It was subtle, nearly buried by the stench of blood, but I recognized it. It was the same energy I'd seen on Manhwa's body, only this was purer and far more violent. Lightning energy. And not just from one source. It felt like several different types of incredibly powerful lightning had exploded and intertwined here. It was chaotic and wild, nothing like the controlled, refined spells the immortal sects usually practiced. I knelt and rubbed a bit of charred earth from the base of a wall between my fingers. I sniffed it. Beyond the smell of burnt soil, there was that sharp, metallic ozone scent you get after a lightning strike. This wasn't just a monster attack. At least, not entirely. My heart sank. I stood up and carefully navigated the yard, slipping into a narrow alleyway. The deeper I went into Lu village, the worse it got. Every house was gapped open, stained with blood. Buildings looked like they had been hit by battering rams or blown apart from the inside. I followed the lingering traces of spiritual energy toward the center of the village. The houses here were more elegant. This was where the wealthy families and the village had lived. The destruction here was absolute. Great manors had been reduced to piles of rubble. The smell of lightning and fire was overwhelming. I stopped in front of a grand gateway. The plaque above it was shattered, leaving only 3 words, Lu family ancestral. The energy here was a chaotic storm of remnants. I could almost see it, multiple bolts of devastating lightning crossing and clashing in this very spot. As I scanned the wreckage, a flash of color caught my eye near the threshold. It didn't fit the gray ash around it. I used the tip of my broken blade to poke at a small piece of charred fabric buried in the debris. It was high-quality silk, the kind only the rich could afford. Though half-burnt, I could see it was the hem of a robe. It was embroidered with gold thread in a complex vine pattern. In the center, there was a partial design. I brushed away the soot with my thumb. It looked like a cloud. Inside the cloud, there was the corner of a character. It was blurred, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. A cloud motif. My breath hitched. This wasn't the insignia of any of the local cultivation clans I knew in Yunzhou. This looked older, more authoritative. I thought of the purple mark on Manhwa. I thought of old Kai pointing toward the sky. A terrifying thought began to form. Was it possible? Swish. The sound of air tearing open hit my ears. I dived to the side instinctively, rolling behind a pile of broken timber. Thwack! A black, fletchless bolt slammed into the pillar where I had been standing. The tail of the bolt vibrated violently, letting out a low hum. It was solid black, made of some strange material that wasn't quite metal or stone, and it was etched with fine runes. A lawbreaker bolt, military-grade gear designed specifically to pierce a cultivator's protective light or a monster's hide. This was an ambush. And these weren't common thugs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stayed low, straining my ears. There was more than one. I heard light, coordinated footsteps. They were flanking me from both sides. I gripped my wrapped blade. I couldn't fight them head-on. They were prepared, and those bolts were lethal. The footsteps on the left were closer. I didn't wait. I lunged out from behind the timber, but I didn't attack. I took the bag of ward-breaking powder old Kai gave me and hurled it toward the footsteps on the right. Pop! Something hit the bag midair, and a cloud of grayish-red powder exploded. It stank of acrid musk. I heard a muffled curse and a moment of confusion from the right. I used that second to sprint toward the man on the left like a stray cat. I held my wrapped blade in front of me. The attacker was a man in gray-brown martial gear, his face masked. He hadn't expected me to charge. He let out a low grunt and swung a long, curved saber at my head. I didn't parry. At the last possible second, I dropped into a slide, skidding across the dirt right under his blade. As I passed, I swung my wrapped broken sword like a club, slamming it hard into his shin. The man screamed and crumpled. I didn't stop to finish him. I scrambled up and bolted deeper into the ruins, toward the densest cluster of buildings. I couldn't run back to the entrance. The guards were there. My only chance was to lose them in the maze of the village. Whistles blew behind me. I heard the frantic thud of boots and the occasional thud of a bolt hitting a wall near my head. I twisted through the ruins, relying on pure instinct and the unnatural agility from the core in my gut. I barely evaded 2 more attempts to corner me. They knew this place better than I did. I ducked into a half-collapsed ancestral hall. Toppled statues and scattered spirit tablets covered the floor. For a moment, the sounds of pursuit faded. I leaned against a pillar, gasping for air, my shirt soaked with sweat. They wanted me dead. They wanted to silence me because of what I'd found. That scrap of silk. I looked down at my hand. During the struggle, the cloth wrapping around my broken blade had loosened. A section of the rusted, jagged metal was exposed. The moment my fingers brushed the cold steel, it happened. Hum. A vibration 10 times stronger than the night before surged from the hilt. It was unmistakable. At the same time, the monster core in my dantian reacted like a block of ice dropped into boiling oil. It exploded with heat. A torrent of scorching energy roared upward, flooding my limbs and my head. My vision in my left eye turned blood red. Arg! I let out a choked groan, collapsing to one knee. The core was thrashing wildly, falling into a terrifying resonance with the vibrating blade. In my red-tinted vision, the rust on the sword seemed to come alive, flowing with a dark, bloody light. The metal grew searing hot. A primal, violent urge to kill crashed into my mind, bringing with it a sense of overwhelming power and the agonizing pain of my soul being set on fire. The footsteps outside were closing in fast. I lifted my head, my lungs burning. Deep within my remaining right eye, a faint, crimson light began to flicker. My fingers tightened around the hilt. I slowly pulled the broken blade from its tattered cloth wrapping. The rusted, jagged edge reflected my face, half twisted in agony, half masked in a feral snarl. Shadows blocked the entrance of the ruined ancestral hall. Gray-clad figures stood there, weapons drawn, crossbows leveled at the darkness where I crouched. Everything in my vision turned into a thick, swirling crimson. The toppled statues, the scattered spirit tablets, the thick cobwebs, it was all stained in that same ominous, bloody hue. Agony exploded from my dantian. It tore through every meridian and bone in my body, a violent tide trying to rip me apart from the inside out just to forge me into something else. The monster core throbbed like a frantic heart. With every pulse, it spat out a searing globule of raw, violent power. But the broken blade in my hand was even more terrifying. It wasn't a cold piece of metal anymore. It felt like a branding iron, a hungry magnet dragging the uncontrolled energy from my body into itself. In return, it fed me a primal, ancient vibration. Kill. The thought wasn't mine. It didn't come from my mind. It was seared directly into my bone marrow, echoing the rhythm of the core and the humming steel. The footsteps stopped at the threshold. At least 3 men. They fanned out, sealing the only exit. They didn't rush in. They were cautious, staring into the unnatural, blood-red gloom of the hall. I stayed on one knee, my right hand white-knuckled around the burning hilt. Veins bulged on the back of my hand, glowing with a faint, demonic red light beneath the skin. Through my crimson-tinted vision, the outlines of the 3 men were sharp. I could see the energy moving inside them. It wasn't the pure chi of a cultivator. It was cold and metallic, the signature of professional assassins or death guards. They were trained to hide and kill in a single breath. Something's wrong in there, a low voice whispered, tinged with a hint of doubt. His breath is a mess. It's chaotic, another replied, his voice colder. He's just a half-demon failure from the Demon Suppression Bureau. What could be wrong? Just finish it and get back to report. Be careful. Wang Chi's leg was ruined. This kid is strange. There was a brief silence. Then, the sound I dreaded. Click. Crossbows ready. Shoot to kill the moment you see him. In my red vision, the killing intent gathered on those 3 crossbows felt like physical needles pricking my skin. I couldn't wait to die. Survival instinct finally overrode the burning pain of my soul. I let out a low, beast-like growl. I didn't stand up. I lunged from the ground like a stone thrown from a sling, hurtling toward the crossbowman on the left. My speed was insane. It was far beyond my physical limits. The resonance between the core and the blade forced power into my muscles with brutal efficiency. The assassins didn't expect me to strike first. The man on the left only saw a dark red blur smashing through the rotting window frame. Wood splinters exploded everywhere. He panicked and pulled the trigger. Swoosh. The black bolt grazed my shoulder, drawing a line of fire and blood. I didn't feel it. My entire world was the broken blade in my hand. For a split second, the rusted metal seemed to glow. The chaotic patterns of rust flowed like veins filled with dark light. I didn't have a technique. I didn't have a move. I just swung with everything I had. The blade hit the man's waist. It didn't feel like cutting through flesh. It felt like slicing through thick, half-frozen jelly. The blade passed through with a slight drag. The assassin made a short, wheezing sound. He froze. He looked down at his waist in disbelief. There was a clean, smooth cut, but no blood sprayed out. The skin at the edges turned a sickly gray-white, as if all life had been sucked out of it instantly. Then, his cold internal energy erupted from the wound like a bursting dam. He collapsed into a heap. I didn't stop. I used my momentum to roll forward, dodging 2 more bolts that thudded deep into the dirt wall behind me. The remaining 2 assassins were furious. They moved in sync. One charged me with a saber, his blade flashing like snow to hem me in. The other stepped back, frantically reloading his crossbow for a killing shot. The swordsman was fast and vicious. On any other day, I would have been dead in seconds. But now, the surging power and the living blade put me in a trance. The pain was still there, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. I could see the trajectory of his strike. I could feel the weak points in his energy flow. It was a combat instinct that wasn't mine, a gift from the blade. I didn't retreat. I stepped into his strike. I swung the broken blade upward in a sharp diagonal. My timing was perfect, hitting him just as his own momentum peaked. Clang! The screech of metal on metal was deafening. My rusted scrap didn't shatter. Instead, a surge of brutal strength threw his heavy saber aside. The assassin's grip broke, his hand bleeding, his chest wide open. Horror flashed in his eyes as he couldn't understand how a half-demon had this much power. I didn't give him a chance to breathe. Using the recoil, I flicked the blade in a small arc. The tip hissed through the air like a viper, aiming straight for his throat. He threw his head back in a desperate move, trying to swat the blade away with his left hand. Stab! The tip sank into the flesh just below his collarbone. It wasn't a deep wound, but the moment the metal touched his skin, the man screamed. He felt a cold, hungry force tunneling into him. His hard-earned internal energy was being sucked out through the wound. It was disappearing into the sword. "Hey, a demon blade!" he shrieked, his cold professional mask shattering into pure terror. I felt it too. The blade was feasting. A thin, cold stream of energy flowed through the hilt into my arm. It momentarily cooled the burning pain in my meridians, but it brought a new, sickening sensation of being bloated, and an even deeper craving for blood. Suddenly, a third bolt hissed toward my back. I felt it coming as if I had eyes in the back of my head. I twisted at the last second. The bolt tore through the skin on my ribs. It stung like hell, but the distraction let the wounded assassin scramble back toward his partner. The 2 of them stared at me, their eyes filled with a mix of dread and disbelief. They had been sent to kill a lowly grunt who saw too much. Now, they were facing a monster with a cursed blade that could swallow a man whole. The air around me was thick with a mix of demonic energy and a murderous chill. My eyes felt cold, glowing a deep, bloody crimson. I probably looked like a vengeful ghost crawling straight out of hell. Inside the ancestral hall, a heavy silence fell. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the suppressed, terrified gasps of the two assassins. The broken blade in my hand was still scorching hot, but that violent resonance was starting to fade. I could feel the demon core inside me calming down. The explosion of power and the internal energy the blade had just sucked from that man had satisfied its hunger for now. But the cost was steep. My body screamed with tearing pain, and a wave of exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. The crimson vision in my left eye flickered unsteadily. I couldn't stay and fight. They still had a crossbow, and if this dragged on, more enemies would show up. My eyes scanned the corner of the hall and found a hole hidden behind a collapsed beam. It was a gap leading to the backyard. The two killers saw my gaze and realized what I was planning. The crossbowman raised his weapon again. Without a second thought, I lunged forward and hurled the broken blade at the swordsman. He shrieked and dove out of the way, but the blade wasn't meant for him. It whistled through the air and thudded deep into a wooden pillar behind them, the character engraved on the metal trembling slightly. While they were distracted by the flying steel, I used every ounce of my remaining strength. I threw myself at the hole in the wall, crashing through splintered wood and broken bricks. I rolled hard, tumbling into the overgrown backyard of the ancestral hall. After him, a furious voice roared behind me, followed by the frantic pounding of boots. The backyard was a graveyard of ruins and tall weeds. I didn't look back. I ignored the agony in my limbs and scrambled to my feet, sprinting toward the edge of the village. I could hear them right on my heels, the occasional hiss of a crossbow bolt passing my ear. My strength was draining fast. The backlash from the demon core was returning like a cold tide, leaving me weak and dizzy. My vision started to go black. Every breath I took tasted like rusted iron. I had to lose them. I dove into a cluster of burnt-out houses, weaving through the charred skeletons of buildings. I turned corner after corner until I found a half-collapsed, dried-up well. I scrambled inside and pulled a pile of rotting straw mats over the opening. I curled up in the darkness, my chest heaving, my ears straining for any sound. Footsteps lingered nearby for a while. I heard them cursing under their breath, searching, but eventually, the sounds faded into the distance. Silence returned, broken only by the wind whistling through the ruins. I finally let my guard down, just an inch. The pain, the exhaustion, and the lingering cold violence from the blade washed over me. I reached into my robe with trembling fingers. The piece of charred cloth with the strange cloud pattern was still there. Even in that frantic escape, I had instinctively protected it. But the broken blade was gone. It was still pinned to that pillar in the hall. A hollow feeling settled in my chest. That sword was cursed. It would probably cause more trouble if someone found it. But it was the only thing my father had left me. More than that, the way it had resonated with my demon core. It felt like I had touched the edge of a forbidden power. I shook the thought away. I had to survive first. I needed to get out of Lu Village and bring this cloth back. But I couldn't go straight to the demon-suppressing bureau. Old One, the clerk, might know something, but what about the others? These assassins had found me too easily. There had to be an insider. I remembered Old One's hesitant look from the night before and the purple mark on Shermang's body. The immortal sex. The great exalted one. I leaned against the cold, damp wall of the well and licked my cracked lips, tasting blood and dust. The red light in my left eye finally died out, leaving me in total darkness. I needed to patch my wounds and find a way to recover some strength. Maybe I should head to Old Dog's place in the south of the city. He was a shady character with a big mouth and deep connections, but he wasn't cheap. I felt the 20 copper coins in my pocket and the 2 remaining Qingshin pills Old Man Qin had given me. In the distance, an owl shrieked again, long, mournful, and shifting. It felt like it was circling the dead village, searching for its next meal. A few slivers of moonlight filtered through the gaps in the straw mats, resting on my blood-stained uniform and my pale face. In the dark, I squeezed the charred cloth until my nails dug into my palms. The pain was like a pack of starving wolves, gnawing at every inch of my body. The graze from the crossbow bolt burned like fire, and the sword wound on my shoulder had soaked my sleeve in cold, sticky blood. But the worst was my dantian. Forcing the demon core to activate and then cutting it off had left my insides feeling like they were being stirred with red-hot needles. I stayed huddled in the corner of the well, gritting my teeth to keep from making a sound. I took one of the remaining pills and swallowed it dry. A faint coolness spread through me, barely steadying my boiling blood, but it couldn't stop my meridians from twitching. The world outside was deathly still. I didn't know if the killers were still nearby, but I couldn't stay here. Once dawn broke, the patrols would expand their search, or worse things would be drawn to the scent of blood. I tore a strip from my inner shirt and crudely bandaged my shoulder. I mixed some dirt with my spit and smeared it over the graze on my ribs, a desperate, dirty way to stop the inflammation, but better than nothing. By the time I was done, I was gasping for air, my head spinning. The copper coins were still there. The charred cloth was still there. It felt heavy in my pocket, like a piece of burning coal. But the blade was gone. My heart felt empty. It wasn't just about the heirloom. That feeling of power, as terrifying and evil as it was, had been the first time I felt like I wasn't weak. That sword was no ordinary weapon. It drank internal energy. Was it demonic or some lost divine artifact? It didn't matter now. I had to live. I carefully pushed the straw mat aside, just enough to see. The ruins were bathed in a pale, silver moonlight. No movement. Just shadows that looked like reaching claws. I waited for another 15 minutes before I finally crawled out of the well. The night wind hit my damp clothes, shivering the last of the warmth from my body. I checked my bearings and headed south, away from the path I had taken to get here. I couldn't go back the same way. They'd be waiting. The south was more desolate, leading toward the potter's fields and the old woods. It was dangerous, but it was the best cover I had. I moved like a wounded stray dog, limping through the shadows. Every step pulled at my stitches. The sound of my feet on the gravel sounded like thunder in my ears. I suppressed the demon core's perception to the absolute minimum, keeping just enough to see in the dark. Even then, my dantian throbbed in protest. Twice, I heard voices and footsteps in the distance. I froze, holding my breath until they passed. I tried to kick dirt over the blood droplets I left behind, praying it was enough. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the southern edge of Lu Village. Beyond a leaning mud wall overgrown with withered vines lay the jagged, uneven shadows of the mass graves. Beyond the ruins lay the dark, jagged silhouette of the mountain forests. I tried to climb over a crumbling mud wall, but my strength gave out. I tumbled down the other side, hitting the ground hard. The impact ripped at my stitches. A blinding flash of white pain seared through my vision, and I stayed pinned to the dirt, gasping. I couldn't stop. I was still too close to the village. I forced myself up, shaking. I checked the stars to find my bearings and began limping toward the southwest of Yunzhou City. I wasn't going back to the city gates, and I definitely wasn't going back to the demon-suppressing bureau. That place was a dragon's den now. I needed somewhere hidden. I headed for Muddy Loach Lane. It was a chaotic slum in the southwest corner of the city, a labyrinth of low, filthy shacks and narrow alleys. It was a haven for fugitives, the undocumented, and those with nowhere left to run. There was a man there nicknamed Old Dog. He ran a semi-underground shop, selling secrets and brokering shady deals. A few years ago, I'd crossed paths with him during a case involving black market demon parts. I knew he was well connected. If you had enough money, or something of equal value, he could solve almost any problem. But reaching Muddy Loach Lane meant crossing miles of wilderness and the slums hugging the city walls. In my state, it was a death march. I took it one agonizing step at a time. By the darkest hour before dawn, I finally reached the base of the city walls. The massive stone fortifications loomed over me like a silent black mountain range, blotting out the stars. Below the walls sat a sprawl of shacks and trash heaps. Sewage flowed freely, and the stench was suffocating. Even the night watchman avoided this place. I navigated through the shadows, avoiding any hut that still had a flickering light. I saw two beggars huddled under tattered mats. They glanced at me with numb, hollow eyes and then looked away. In a place like this, a man covered in blood wasn't a rare sight. The entrance to Muddy Loach Lane was so narrow I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. It felt like descending into the earth. I took a deep breath, swallowing the metallic taste of blood in my throat, and pushed inside. The path twisted downward. The ground was slick with something oily and foul. On either side, rotting wooden walls leaned inward, almost touching. I heard muffled coughing, cursing, and the smell of mold mixed with cheap wine and copper. I followed my memory through the maze until I reached a low, broken door that blended into the filth. There was no sign, just a crude, crooked drawing of a dog's head. I knocked 3 times, a pause, then twice. A dry, wheezing sound came from inside. After a moment, a small slit in the door slid open. A single, bloodshot eye peered out at me. "Who?" The voice rasped like a broken bellows. "Old dog, it's me," I whispered. "Shindu from the bureau." The eye scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my blood-soaked shoulder and pale face. The door remained shut for several heartbeats. "Wait." The slit snapped shut. A moment later, the door creaked open just a few inches. "Get in. Fast." I slipped inside, and the bolt slammed home behind me. The room was tiny and suffocating, packed with rusted iron, cracked porcelain, and moldy scrolls. A tiny oil lamp sat on a rickety counter, barely illuminating the withered, sunken face of old dog. He wore a greasy, padded coat and watched me with narrowed eyes. "Tsk, Constable Chun," he chuckled, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You've got yourself into some real trouble this time." His gaze was sharp as a needle. He looked at my wounds and my ruined uniform. "The smell of Lu village," he muttered, "and the lingering sting of a law-breaking crossbow. You've provoked some heavy hitters." I didn't deny it. I pulled out my small pouch of 20 copper coins and the last 2 pills old man Sheen had given me. I set them on the counter. "Treat my wounds. I need clean medicine and bandages. Then give me a set of plain, old clothes. After that, tell me what people are saying about Lu village and the cloud pattern." Old dog didn't even look at the coins. He tapped his bony fingers on the wood. "This pittance only buys you the tail end of a rumor. Medicine? Clothes? You think I run a charity, constable?" I was ready for that. I reached into my robe and pulled out the charred cloth with the cloud pattern. I laid it carefully under the lamp. "How much is this worth?" Old dog's dull eyes suddenly flashed. He leaned in, but he didn't touch it. He pulled a cracked monocle from under the counter and perched it on his nose. His breathing became shallow and quick as he studied the fabric. "Cloud silk," he whispered. "Gold thread embroidery. Ancient cloud patterns." His trembling finger traced the edge of the cloth. "Lightning fire scorch marks. Residual spiritual energy. Dominant, pure, and strangely righteous." "Heh. Interesting. Very interesting." He looked up, his eye magnified behind the thick glass. "You got this from Lu village?" "Yes," I said. "I ran into 3 of them. They were professionals. Law-breaking crossbows, cold internal energy. They didn't move like common mercenaries." Old dog took off his monocle and wiped it slowly. He stared at the cloth, his expression shifting through a dozen different emotions. "This material," he said slowly, "it doesn't belong to any sect or noble house currently in Yunzhou. This pattern is older, much older. When I was an apprentice at the city's largest pawn shop, I saw something like it once. It was an ancient jade from the previous dynasty. They said it belonged to a guardian family from an even earlier era. But that family is gone, rotted to dust." He paused, locking eyes with me. "The Lu family is slaughtered. The sects have sealed the village. The army is patrolling the perimeter. And now, assassins carrying ancient relics are trying to silence a lowly constable. Shindu, the thing you're holding is hotter than you realize. It's hot enough to kill everyone in this city." "I know," I rasped. "That's why I'm here. I need to know who this represents." Old dog fell silent, weighing the risks. Finally, his hand blurred. He snatched the cloth and stuffed it into his robe. "I'll take it. It covers your expenses and one piece of information." He turned and dragged a dusty wooden box from the shadows. Inside were jars of ointment and relatively clean linen strips. "Sit. Strip." I gritted my teeth and peeled off my ruined uniform, exposing a map of old and new scars. Old dog glanced at the ugly, protruding red scar over my dantian, the mark of my core transplant, but he said nothing. He worked with practiced skill, cleaning the gashes and applying a pungent black salve. It burned like fire at first, then turned into a soothing chill. The bleeding stopped. "Here is your news," old dog whispered. his voice so low only I could hear. 2 weeks before the massacre at Lu village, something happened. A few people from the village went to Bauchi Pavilion in the northern part of the city, Old Dog whispered. They wanted to sell an heirloom. A jade pendant or a seal, I'm not sure. But the deal fell through. I frowned. Bauchi Pavilion was a famous antique shop with deep connections. They said it had a unique cloud pattern, he continued. The appraisers there didn't dare touch it. They were afraid of where it came from. The seller left pretty unhappy. Bauchi Pavilion. I muttered. Don't even think about it, Old Dog warned, his eyes narrowing. You can't afford to provoke them. And there's more. Lately, the city is crawling with new faces. They aren't martial artists, and they aren't merchants. They hide their presence well, staying in back alley inns and spending gold like water. They don't talk. They're waiting for something. We're looking for it. Does it have to do with Lu village? I asked. Who knows? But the timing is too perfect. Old Dog tied the last knot on my bandages. There's a crate of clothes over there. Find something that fits and leave through the back. It leads to the sewer. Follow the ditch south for half a mile to a half-collapsed earth god temple. You can hide there for now. I moved to the crate and pulled out a set of old, gray burlap clothes. They were rough and a bit loose, but they were perfect for blending in. As I reached the back door, I stopped and looked back. Old Dog, that cloud pattern. Do you really not know anything else? Old Dog pulled his hands into his sleeves, receding into the shadows behind the counter. The flickering oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows across his wrinkled face. Knowing too much is the fastest way to die, he said softly. All I know is that when you touch something like that, you either have heaven-sent luck or a fate harder than the heavens themselves. Watch yourself, Constable Chun. I pushed open the door. A wave of filth and rot hit me instantly. Outside was a stagnant drainage ditch choked with trash. I didn't say another word. I slipped out and pulled the door shut behind me. Inside the shop, Old Dog pulled the charred cloth from his robe. He held it up to the lamp for a long time, a complex expression crossing his face. The cloud pattern of the ancient guardians, he whispered to himself. Traces of thunder arts. Lu village. Humph. The sky over Yunzhou is about to change. Don't die too fast, kid. I haven't seen enough of this play yet. He blew out the lamp, plunging the shop into total darkness. Outside, I ignored the stench and the throbbing pain in my side. I followed the ditch toward the deeper darkness of the south. Eventually, the silhouette of the temple appeared. It was a ruin, hunched in the shadows like a wounded beast. Meanwhile, on the far side of the city, the demon-suppressing bureau was silent and decaying. Oldwin sat under a single lamp, staring at a transfer order that had just arrived. It bore a special seal. His face was as grim as iron. The order was clear. A special envoy was being sent to reinvestigate the Lu village massacre. They needed a local guide, someone brave, someone who knew the terrain. The first name on the list was mine, Chindu. The horizon was just beginning to turn a cold, pale white. The Earth God Temple was even worse than I expected. Half the door was missing, and the other half hung crookedly, creaking in the wind. The roof had collapsed, exposing the iron-gray sky. Inside, the head of the clay deity lay shattered on the floor, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air smelled of mold and sewage. But it was hidden. It was far from people. I found a dry corner in a collapsed side room and sat down, leaning against the cold stone wall. Exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. Old Dog's ointment was working. The wounds felt cool and itchy, and the bleeding had stopped, but the internal damage from the core backlash was something no salve could fix. I pulled out a piece of hard bread Old Dog had given me. I chewed it slowly, washing it down with rusty rainwater I found in a broken jar. My stomach settled, but I knew I was running out of time. I had to think. The massacre. The purple mark on Meng's body. The assassins. The cloud pattern. He was the pillar of the Yunzhou region, the head of the Taoist palace, a living immortal. If his sect was involved, I wasn't just fighting assassins or corrupt officials. I was fighting the very foundation of the world. Against a power like that, resistance seemed like suicide. But then I thought of the 43 people in Lu village. I thought of their blood soaking into the dirt, their lives erased and blamed on a demon just to keep the sect's reputation clean. And I thought of myself. The assassins wanted me dead because I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. There was nowhere to run. The bureau was compromised. The city was a trap. I touched the ugly scar on my belly. I was a half-demon, an outcast who had survived by keeping my head down and accepting the world's contempt. I had expected to die quietly one day when my core finally consumed me. But now, things were different. That moment in the ancestral hall, when the broken blade resonated with my core, it had given me a surge of power. It was violent and agonizing, but it was a crack of light in the darkness. It was a chance to control my own fate. I needed power. Not the righteous, spiritual energy of the sects, but a power that could keep me alive in this hell. Even if it was forbidden. Even if it was demonic. The broken blade was gone. I'd lost it back at the village. I had to get it back. It was the only thing my father left me, and the only thing that could help me survive. But Lu village would be crawling with guards and killers now. I couldn't go back alone. I needed help. I needed information. And most of all, I needed to stay alive long enough to use them. I needed to recover. My state was a mess. Old Dog had mentioned a lead about a spiritual treasure, but he'd warned me never to touch it lightly. I wondered about the new faces in the city. Were they cleaners sent by the immortal sects to tie up loose ends? Or were they hunting for something specific? I leaned against a crumbling wall and closed my eyes. I forced myself to regulate my breathing. My internal energy was weak, crawling through my meridians like a dying insect. I tried to soothe my restless demon core and mend my damaged organs, but the Qingshin powder had worn off. Every breath sent a sharp, stabbing pain through my dantian. I don't know how long I drifted in that haze. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint sound. It wasn't the creak of a rotting door or the flow of the nearby sewer. It was the sound of something hard lightly scraping the ground. It was soft, slow. It was coming from the main hall. I snapped awake instantly. I held my breath, pushing my senses to the limit. I suppressed the demon core in my left eye to its lowest level, using only the most basic dark vision and enhanced hearing. The scraping stopped. Then came the soft rustle of fabric and a suppressed, intermittent gasp. It sounded like someone enduring extreme pain. It wasn't an assassin. If it were them, they wouldn't be this cautious, and they certainly wouldn't be making sounds of injury. I stood up silently. I moved to a gap in the collapsed side room and peered through the cracks in the masonry. The darkest hour before dawn had passed. Faint light leaked through the ruined roof and broken doors, outlining the main hall. A dark figure was curled up on the open ground in front of the altar. Based on the size, it wasn't a large man, maybe a teenager or a small adult. His back was toward me. His shoulders trembled. One hand was pressed against his ribs, and a dark liquid was slowly seeping through his fingers, dripping into the dust of ages. He was hurt, and it looked bad. He tried to move behind the altar for better cover, but the movement flared his wound. He let out a low groan and gave up, simply shrinking further into the shadows. I watched him quietly. It didn't look like a trap. His breathing was weak and chaotic, carrying the scent of total exhaustion. There was no cold intent of a killer, no ripple of refined spiritual energy. He seemed like an ordinary person, or perhaps a cultivator so badly wounded he couldn't even hide his presence. I hesitated. I had enough problems of my own. Getting involved was a risk I couldn't afford. But looking at that trembling back and the growing pool of blood, I couldn't harden my heart completely. I let out a soft cough. The figure in the hall froze. The hand on his ribs clenched into a fist. His other hand moved toward his waist, though the motion was slow and clumsy from the pain. He turned his head with great effort, his eyes full of wariness. In the dim light, I saw a face covered in dust and blood. He was young, maybe 16 or 17. His face was as white as paper, his lips quivering from blood loss, but his eyes were startlingly bright. They were filled with fear, suspicion, and the stubbornness of a cornered animal. His pupils contracted. He tensed up, trying to find a way to defend himself or run, but his injuries kept him pinned. "Don't be nervous," I said. My voice was raspy from thirst and fatigue. "I'm just hiding here too. You're hurt." The boy didn't speak. He just stared at me, his guard not dropping for a second. I walked out of the side room slowly, keeping my movements light to show I wasn't a threat. I had no weapon in my hands. My broken blade was gone, leaving me with only a short dagger at my waist. I was wearing the coarse, old clothes old dog had given me, stained with dirt and dried blood. I didn't look much better than he did. If that blood keeps flowing, you're going to die here, I said, stopping a few paces away. I pointed to his ribs. Need help? I have some medicine. The boy remained silent. His eyes darted between my face and my empty hands, judging me. After a few long breaths, his body relaxed slightly, though he didn't move his hand from the wound. He gave a tiny nod, almost invisible. I went back to the side room and grabbed my meager bundle. It was just a rag wrapping some leftover flatbread and odds and ends. I pulled out a jar of black ointment old dog had given me. I smeared a bit on my palm and knelt beside the boy. Lift your shirt. I need to clean it before applying the medicine, I told him. He hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand away. His deep blue shirt was soaked through. He gritted his teeth and used his uninjured hand to lift the fabric. There was a long, diagonal gash across his ribs. The flesh was rolled back, deep and jagged. The edges were blackened, looking less like a blade strike and more like it had been burned or corroded by something foul. I frowned. This wasn't a normal wound. It looked like the result of a low-level spell or a poison weapon. I didn't ask questions. I used the last of the clean water from my canteen to soak a relatively clean strip of cloth. I carefully wiped away the grime and blood. The boy flinched from the pain, but he didn't make a sound. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Once it was clean, I spread the black ointment evenly over the gash. As the medicine touched the raw flesh, he hissed, his fingers digging deep into the dirt. Endure it, I muttered. It stings, but it stops the bleeding and helps the skin knit. I wrapped the wound with clean cloth, my movements practiced and steady. When I was finished, I stepped back and sat on a fallen beam. I took a small sip of water and handed the canteen to him. Drink some. He looked at the canteen, then at me. Finally, he took it, swallowed a few mouthfuls, and handed it back. Thank you, he whispered. His voice had that scratchy quality of a boy going through puberty. How did you end up like this? I asked casually, watching his reaction. Who did you piss off? His eyes flickered. He looked down at his blood-stained fingers. Someone stole something from me. I was hurt while trying to get it back. It was a vague answer. He was clearly hiding something. I didn't push. I just hummed in response and looked toward the door. This place isn't safe. Once the sun is up, you'll be an easy target. What's your plan? The boy shook his head. A look of confusion and deep-seated fear crossed his face. I don't know. I can't go back. They might still be looking for me. The boy bit his lip and went silent. I understood. He had secrets, and those secrets brought big trouble. But I was barely hanging on myself. I didn't have the energy or the ability to dig into someone else's mess. Saving his life was the limit of what I could do. This temple is a trap if you stay too long, I said, standing up. I have to leave before dawn. What about you? He looked up at me. There was a moment of struggle in his eyes, like he wanted to say something, but he eventually just shook his head. I'll hide a bit longer, he whispered. I nodded and didn't say another word. I walked back to the side room, checked my bundle, and made sure the charred cloth with the cloud pattern was tucked safely against my skin. Then I walked out, glancing one last time at the boy huddled in the shadow of the god statue. Take care, I said. I turned and headed for a gap in the broken wall on the other side of the temple. I needed to find a way to sneak back into the city. I needed to know the situation at the Demon Suppressing Bureau. I needed to know if there was a bounty on my head. Most importantly, I had to find news about the broken blade and the shop called Treasure Pavilion. As I reached the gap in the wall, the boy behind me spoke. His voice was soft, but there was a sharp edge of urgency to it. Are you running from someone too? Did you mess with the wrong people? I paused. I didn't look back. Something like that, I muttered. The boy fell silent for a moment, seemingly weighing a heavy decision. Then, the words tumbled out of him quickly. If you're going into the city for information, watch out for the third arch under Jinkei Bridge. I saw two men with weapons hiding there in the middle of the night. They didn't look like good people. He took a breath and continued. And there's a man named Hunchback Lou at the South Market Morning Fair. He sells old books. He knows a lot of random things, but he's greedy. He only talks for money, or for something special in exchange. I tilted my head slightly. Why are you telling me this? The boy lowered his gaze, his voice barely a whisper. The boy said, You helped me. And the smell on you, it's strange. But you don't seem like a bad person. The smell? My heart skipped a beat. He was talking about the lingering scent of the demon core pills. This kid could actually sense it. I didn't ask any more questions. I just gave a short nod. Thanks. I didn't stay a second longer. I vanished through the wall and melted into the deep, pre-dawn shadows. Back in the temple, the boy watched the spot where I disappeared, clutching the wound under his ribs. His pale face was a mask of conflicting emotions. He slowly opened his other hand, which had been clenched into a tight fist. Resting in his palm was a small, dull bronze bell. Carved into its surface was a tiny, intricate cloud pattern, identical to the corner of the pattern on the charred cloth I carried. The bell was silent. The boy gripped it tight, as if it were the only thing in the world that could keep him safe. Far off toward the Yunzhou prefectural city, the first light of dawn finally pierced through the iron-gray clouds. It illuminated the towering silhouette of the city walls and the hidden filth of the wasteland outside. A new struggle was about to begin. The morning light felt like a blade, cutting through the haze over the city. I followed a drainage ditch south, making a wide circle to avoid the entrance of Mud Hill Alley. I could hear the faint rhythm of patrols on the walls and the growing clamor of horses and wagons at the gates. During the day, the city was a different beast, full of life, but crawling with eyes and hidden orders. The Jinkei bridge the boy mentioned was in the east, spanning the Yudai River. It was a major thoroughfare, and the arches underneath were usually packed with beggars and vagrants. It was a melting pot, a place where dark deals and information changed hands. Hunchback Lou at the South Market was another lead I had to handle with care. I looked like a wreck. My gray clothes were caked in dust and dried blood. My face was a mess of grime. If I walked into the crowded South Market like this, I might as well turn myself in. I needed to clean up and get a fresh look. I found a secluded breakfast stall near the city wall and bought 2 steaming vegetable buns. The owner was an old woman who didn't even lift her eyelids as she took my copper coins. I crouched in the shadows of a corner and ate quickly. The warmth of the food started to chase away the bone-deep chill and weakness in my body. Next, I found a half-abandoned corner used for dumping coal slag. I used the relatively clean ash mixed with dirt to smear over the bloodstains on my face and hands, hiding the edges of my wounds. I ruffled my hair until I looked like just another scruffy, overworked laborer. I counted my remaining money. 17 copper coins. In Yunzhou, that was barely enough for a set of the cheapest coarse clothes or half a day in a mud tank, a cheap, communal bathhouse in the back alleys. I chose the bath. Clean skin and cheap, but decent clothes would keep the guards from looking too closely at me. I spent 5 coins at a cramped, foul-smelling bathhouse in a back alley full of stables. I washed away the blood and ash in a tiny private stall and spent another 3 coins to buy a set of used, but clean, indigo blue commoner's clothes from the owner. I wrapped my old rags and bloodied bandages into a bundle and paid 1 more coin to store them there. The man in the mirror was still pale with dark circles under his eyes, but at least I didn't look like a walking corpse anymore. My wounds were redressed. As long as I didn't move too violently, they stayed hidden under the fabric. Most importantly, the stench of blood and the smell of death from Lu Village were mostly covered by the scent of cheap soap. 8 coins left. By the time I stepped out, the sun was high. The South Market was in full swing. It was a sea of people. The air was a thick soup of shouting vendors, haggling customers, and the smells of spices, livestock, and sweat. Hunchback Lou's book stall was tucked away in a western corner near the street performers. It was a simple shack made of broken boards and felt. Yellowed, wrinkled books and scrolls were piled haphazardly on straw mats. An old man with thinning white hair sat on a small stool, squinting as he repaired a tattered book in the morning light. His back was so hunched he looked like a curled-up shrimp. I didn't approach him immediately. I stopped at a nearby stall selling bamboo baskets, pretending to browse, while watching the book stall from the corner of my eye. Lou was focused, his hands moving with practiced patience. He ignored most people, only looking up to flash a few fingers when someone asked for a price. Seeing nothing suspicious, I walked over and crouched down. I flipped through a stack of local records. "How much for this Yunzhou geography?" I asked, picking up a book with a torn cover. Lou didn't look up. He held up 3 fingers. 3 coppers. I asked. He finally glanced at me, expressionless, and nodded. I pulled out 3 coins and set them on a green brick he used as a paperweight. I didn't leave. I kept flipping through the books, keeping my voice low and casual. Boss, I'm looking for some info. I heard someone from Lu Village was trying to sell an old family heirloom recently. It had a very specific cloud pattern on it. The deal fell through. You're well connected. Do you know which shop turned it down? Or what that cloud pattern actually looks like? Lu's hand stopped. He didn't answer right away. He stared at me for a few heartbeats, then lowered his eyes and went back to his work as if he hadn't heard a word. I didn't rush him. I just waited, slowly turning pages. After a long silence, Lu spoke in a raspy, slow voice. Customer, I'm just an old man selling old books. Rumors aren't worth much. Lu Village, that place is a crime scene now. Bad luck. You're better off not asking. I'm asking because of what happened, I said, my voice steady. I heard the item was special. Ancient cloud patterns. The experts were too scared to take it because of its history. I'm just curious. What kind of origin could make a man this afraid? Lu Tuozi stayed silent, his hands moving faster as he repaired the old book. I knew talk was cheap. I needed to give him something valuable, or at least make him think I had it. I felt the charred cloud pattern cloth hidden in my shirt. It was too dangerous to show him. I had to pivot. Boss, I'll be honest with you, I said, dropping my voice even lower. I have a relative. A few days ago, he found a little trinket near the mass graves outside the city. A bronze bell, about the size of a thumbnail. It had some blurry patterns on it, looked ancient. I watched him closely. He's a coward, I continued. He's too scared to keep it, so he asked me to find someone who knows the trade. He just wants a few coins for it. Since you've seen it all, I figured you might know where I could take a thing like that without bringing trouble down on my head. A bell. Lu finally looked up. His eyes searched my face, sharp and scrutinizing. What kind of bell? How big? What were the patterns? Like I said, thumb-sized. I lied, mixing truth with fiction. Dark bronze. The patterns were hard to see. Maybe clouds, maybe waves. It was a mess. Lu's brow furrowed for a split second. Something flashed deep in his eyes, but he buried it instantly. He went back to his books, his fingers unconsciously rubbing the yellowed paper. I've never seen such a thing, he said slowly. But if you're looking for its history, you might try your luck near Bauchi Pavilion in the North City. Plenty of people there know their stuff. But the water is deep there. Whether you get answers or a knife in the back depends on your luck and your skill. Bauchi Pavilion. It matched what Old Dog had told me. I've heard the threshold there is high, I muttered. A man like me can't just walk through the front door. If you can't get in the door, try the tea houses nearby, Lu whispered, his voice heavy with meaning. Talk to the porters in the back alleys. The guys who haul the trash. Sometimes the help knows more than the master. He paused, giving me a long look. Lately, there are a lot of new faces in that area. If you go, keep your eyes open and your ears up. And your mouth? Keep that shut. That was a clear warning. Thanks for the advice, boss, I said, standing up. I tucked the geography book I'd bought into my robe. I didn't hear a word about any bell, Lu snapped, waving his hand like he was shooing a fly. Now get moving. I didn't say another word. I turned and vanished into the morning crowd. Lu's warning confirmed my suspicions. The area around Bauchi Pavilion was crawling with strangers, likely the same people involved in the Lu Village massacre. I didn't head north immediately. Instead, I took a long detour toward Gold Sparrow Bridge in the east. A kid had mentioned men with weapons lurking under the arches. I needed to know if it was true. Besides, the bridge was a crossroads for all kinds of people. It was the perfect place to scavenge for rumors about the Demon Suppressing Bureau. Gold Sparrow Bridge was a massive stone structure with 3 arches. Carved birds lined the railings, though most were worn down by time. Below, the river was thick and sluggish. I didn't go down to the riverbank. I stayed on the bridge, blending in with the flow of carts and pedestrians. I leaned against the rail, pretending to admire the view while my eyes scanned the shadows below. The first arch held a few beggars soaking up the sun. The middle arch was for the boats. The third arch, the one the boy had pointed out, was choked with jagged rocks and discarded fishing nets. At first glance, it looked empty, but my senses told me otherwise. There was no breath of a living person, but there was a lingering, cold presence. Someone had been there recently, or they were hiding very, Very well. I stayed for a few more minutes. I saw a blind fortune teller tapping his cane and a couple of thugs with blades at their waists, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. It wasn't coming from under the bridge. It was coming from further away, maybe the second-story window of a tea house or a balcony across the water. There were eyes everywhere. The Lu Village incident was like a stone thrown into a dead pond. On the surface, it looked calm, but the undercurrents were violent. Everyone was watching, testing, and searching. I couldn't stay here. I needed a safer way to recover my strength and find my father's broken blade. Maybe I should head back toward the demon-suppressing bureau. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the best place to hide and listen. I needed to know if they had put a price on my head yet. I pushed off the railing and followed the crowd off the bridge. I avoided the main streets, ducking into a quiet residential alley. I hadn't gone 20 paces when the feeling of being watched turned into a sharp, icy chill. It wasn't coming from the front or the back. It was coming from above. My heart surged. I didn't look up. I threw my body forward into a desperate roll. Thwack, thwack. Two short, black daggers slammed into the brick wall where my chest had been a second ago. The hilts vibrated, reflecting a faint, sickly blue light. Poison. The attack came from the roof. I scrambled to my feet, pressing my back against the wall. A figure in gray-brown clothes flashed across the roofline across the alley. They were fast, much faster than the killers from the village. This was a professional. I didn't chase them. They were in the dark, and I was in the light. Running blindly into that alley would be a death sentence.